When people say it's my life, so keep your nose out of it, they're not just making a defensive statement. They're articulating something far deeper, the psychological weight of carrying opinions, judgments, and expectations that don't belong to them. Every human being is born into a social world, a place where family, peers, culture, and society project a narrative of how one ought to live. And to some extent, this structure is useful. It provides order, stability, and shared values. But the problem arises when those opinions become chains, when the voices of others drown out the voice within, when your decisions are no longer your own, but an endless performance to meet someone else's standards. That's what I mean by the burden of unwanted opinions. It's heavy, and it's silent, and it corrodes the soul slowly. Think about how most people live their lives. They make choices about career, relationships, or even the smallest details, how to dress, how to speak, what to enjoy, not because these things resonate with who they are, but because they fear the backlash of disapproval. It's astonishing how much of our lives is determined by the fear of what others might think. You may not even realize it, but this fear shapes you from childhood. The teacher's approval, the parent's pride, the peer's acceptance, all become invisible rulers you measure yourself against. And soon enough, you start to internalize those voices so deeply that you can't distinguish them from your own. You tell yourself, I want this, but often it isn't you wanting at all. It's the shadow of somebody else's desire that you've mistaken for your own. Now, there's a paradox here. On the one hand, we need the opinions of others to guide us, especially when we're young and inexperienced. Without feedback, there's no growth, no correction of mistakes. But on the other hand, when those opinions invade the core of your being, when they dictate the terms of your existence, they stop being guidance and start becoming oppression. It's like living in a house where every window is open to the world, and people walk past shouting instructions into your living room. At some point, you have to decide whether to keep listening or to shut the window and take ownership of your own home. And that takes courage, because distancing yourself from unwanted opinions is not just about rebellion or saying, I don't care. That's shallow defiance. True independence is much harder. It means carefully discerning which voices are wise and worth listening to, and which are toxic or irrelevant. It means accepting the risk that comes with authenticity, that people will judge you, misunderstand you, maybe even abandon you. It's not painless, but it's necessary, because the alternative is worse: to live a life that is not yours, a life crafted out of borrowed expectations. And nothing is more tragic than looking back and realizing you lived more for others than for yourself. Psychologically, this burden of unwanted opinions manifests as constant anxiety, guilt, and second-guessing. You hesitate before speaking. You doubt before acting. You carry an invisible audience in your head, watching, criticizing, waiting to shame you. That inner chorus grows so loud that your own intuition becomes muted. And if you let it go on long enough, you lose the capacity to hear yourself entirely. That is why distancing yourself, choosing to reclaim your life from the noise, is not arrogance. It's an act of survival. Philosophically, you might think of it this way: to be free is not to escape every influence, but to take responsibility for which influences you allow into your life. If you blindly absorb the judgments of others, you're not living, you're outsourcing your existence. But if you consciously choose what to accept and what to reject, then you're no longer a puppet of external voices. You're a human being with agency, someone capable of carrying the weight of life on your own terms. And that makes you stronger, not weaker. Now here's the irony. The people who constantly impose their opinions on you often don't even carry the weight of their own advice. They'll tell you how to live, yet their own lives are marked by confusion, contradiction, and compromise. That's not to dismiss the possibility of wisdom, but it is to say, be cautious. Many of the opinions that weigh you down were never deeply thought out. They were reactions, projections, or even unresolved frustrations masquerading as guidance. Why let such flimsy material dictate the path of your existence? So yes, when someone says, it's my life, so keep your nose out of it, there is a raw truth in that. Life is already hard enough without carrying the unnecessary burden of other people's insecurities disguised as advice. The task of living is difficult, and it demands your full presence, your clarity, your honesty. If you waste it bending to every passing judgment, you will be scattered, pulled apart by 1,000 strings. But until nothing of you remains, and that is why you must draw boundaries. You must learn the discipline of silence, of ignoring, of saying no, not out of bitterness, but out of a fierce loyalty to the person you are meant to become. Your life is finite. Your time is limited. Your choices are the bricks that construct your destiny. Do not let them be stolen by the noise of the crowd. In the end, the burden of unwanted opinions is something every person must confront. Some cave under it and lose themselves. Others stand against it and discover who they are. The question you have to ask yourself is simple. Do you want to live as a shadow of someone else's expectation, or as the authentic reality of your own soul? The answer will determine not just the shape of your life, but the weight of your deathbed. So here is the challenge I leave you with. The next time you feel pressured by the voice of someone else, pause. Ask yourself, is this voice leading me toward truth or away from it? If it is leading you away, let it go. Because this is your life, and you are the one who must carry its consequences. And that's the ultimate truth. If you are the one who bears the cost of your choices, then you are the only one who should own them. There's something profoundly dangerous about allowing too many voices to dictate the course of your life. We live in a time where everyone has an opinion about everything, your choices, your failures, your relationships, your ambitions. And if you're not careful, you become a reflection of their judgments rather than an expression of your own convictions. The truth is, when people say, I'm only giving advice, what they often mean is, I'm projecting my fears, my insecurities, and my regrets onto you. Now don't misunderstand me. Advice is not inherently bad. Wisdom shared from someone who's walked the path before you can be priceless. But the problem arises when unsolicited opinions drown out your own inner compass. Too much external noise leaves you confused, fragmented, and unable to trust your own instincts. And this is precisely why boundaries are necessary. Not because you hate people, but because you love your life enough to protect it from being hijacked. Think about it. Every great innovator, every person who ever changed the world had to learn to filter voices. Imagine if Steve Jobs had listened to the people who told him dropping out of college was foolish. Imagine if Malala had obeyed the voices that told her to stay silent. Or closer to everyday life, think of the number of people who stay in jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, or routines that kill their spirit simply because they're afraid of disappointing others. That's the tyranny of outside judgment, and it can paralyze you. The irony is, most of the people trying to control your decisions don't even have their own lives figured out. They tell you how to live, but privately they're wrestling with dissatisfaction and regret. They'll insist you should play it safe because they never took risks. They'll tell you to avoid rejection because they couldn't handle their own failures. So their voices are not guidance, they're echoes of their own limitations. If you absorb those voices, you inherit their fears and you live a smaller life than the one you were meant to live. But here's the deeper truth. Living authentically always costs something. You will lose approval. You will lose the comfort of fitting in. People will say you've changed, that you've become distant, even arrogant. But you must ask yourself, what's the alternative? To shrink yourself until you're unrecognizable, just to please people who will still find something to criticize anyway? No. That's a form of slow death. The act of setting boundaries, of saying, this is my life, so keep your nose out of it, is not an act of rebellion. It's an act of survival. It's an affirmation that you have one existence, one chance to walk this earth, and you're not going to waste it living by someone else's script. And when you choose that path, something remarkable happens, your decisions become clearer, your energy returns, and your confidence grows, not because life is suddenly easier, but because it's authentically yours. I'll give you a real-life example. I knew a young man who wanted to pursue art. His family told him it was impractical, that he should study business instead. For years, he suppressed his passion, trudging through classes he hated until one day he couldn't bear it anymore. He dropped out, faced the storm of disappointment, and threw himself into painting. Today, he's not only thriving as an artist, but also teaching others to embrace creativity. Now, here's the lesson. Had he continued listening to the crowd, he would have ended up in a safe but lifeless career. The courage to silence those outside voices gave him a life of meaning, and that's the crucial point. Silence is not always about shutting others out. It's about creating the space to hear your own voice clearly. The opinions will never stop. The criticism will always come. But the only question is, which voice do you trust enough to follow? So let me leave you with this. If you live your life seeking approval, you'll die with regret. If you live your life anchored in your own values, you'll face criticism, yes, but you'll also experience the rare joy of being free. You owe that to yourself, and you owe it to the people who matter most, because when you live authentically, you don't just liberate yourself, you give others permission to do the same. So guard your decisions, guard your time, guard your soul, and the next time someone insists on telling you how to live, look them in the eye and remember, it's your life, so keep their nose out of it. There comes a time in every person's life when they must confront the reality that not everyone deserves access to their inner world. It is tempting to think that kindness should be boundless, that openness should be the default, and that keeping the peace is always noble. But the truth is more complicated, more demanding. Sometimes the most responsible act you can take for your own growth and stability is to distance yourself from people who do not respect your boundaries, who do not contribute to your well-being, or who repeatedly exploit your silence and patience. This is not about arrogance, nor about dismissing the humanity of others. Rather, it is about understanding that your energy, your time, and your emotional resources are limited. And if you squander them on the wrong people, you rob yourself, and by extension, the world, of the best version of who you could become. Now, the instinct to keep toxic or careless people close often arises from fear. Fear of conflict, fear of loneliness, fear of guilt. These fears whisper the same lie, that it is cruel to create distance, that it is selfish to protect yourself. But if you examine this carefully, you will see that the opposite is true. What is truly cruel is to allow yourself to be diminished, to allow your dignity to be compromised, because you lacked the courage to draw a line. What is selfish is to spend so much of your energy managing the chaos of others that you have nothing left to offer those who genuinely love you and depend on you. Distance is not punishment, it is clarity. It is the recognition that peace is not free. It is earned through discernment, through the willingness to step back and preserve what is sacred within you. Consider, for example, a person who constantly belittles you under the disguise of humor, who drains your confidence one sarcastic comment at a time. If you stay silent and keep them close, you may think you are avoiding unnecessary drama. But what you are really doing is training yourself to accept mistreatment, reinforcing the idea that your comfort and dignity are negotiable. Over time, this corrodes your self-respect, and worse, it teaches others that they too can treat you lightly. By distancing yourself, you send a message, not only to that person, but to yourself, that you are not a participant in your own degradation. That decision alone can reorient the way you see yourself, and it can transform the standards you set for your future relationships. This same principle applies to those who manipulate through guilt. Perhaps they use your loyalty as a leash, reminding you of past favors, demanding your time and attention with no regard for your present needs. Guilt is one of the most powerful weapons in unhealthy relationships because it ties your sense of goodness to compliance. But goodness does not mean servitude, and compassion does not mean martyrdom. If you cannot say no, your yes means nothing. By creating distance from such dynamics, you affirm that your choices are your own, not the property of someone else's insecurities or demands. Some people will call this cold. They will say you have changed, that you are harsh or detached. But remember this, people who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always frame your growth as betrayal. They will criticize your distance because it forces them to face their own behavior. Do not let their disapproval confuse you. Protecting your life is not cruelty, it is responsibility. Imagine a garden. If you allow weeds to spread unchecked, they will choke the flowers, consume the soil, and leave nothing behind but waste. Cutting them back is not violence against the garden, it is an act of care. Likewise, distancing yourself from destructive people is not an attack. It is cultivation, ensuring that your life can grow in the right direction. And there is another truth hidden in this process. Distance is not always permanent. Sometimes stepping away creates the space for others to reflect, to change, to grow into people who are capable of mutual respect. By refusing to tolerate what is harmful, you hold up a mirror. Whether they look into it and change is not your responsibility. What matters is that you created the conditions for your own peace. So when you hear that inner voice telling you that you should not pull away, ask yourself, who benefits from me staying close? Who pays the cost if I continue? If the answer is that your peace, your growth, and your dignity are sacrificed so that another can remain unchallenged, then you already know the path you must take. The distance you create may hurt in the moment, but in time, it will feel less like loss and more like liberation. You cannot save everyone, and you are not meant to, but you are responsible for saving yourself. And sometimes saving yourself means walking away, even when your heart aches to stay. That act of courage is not rejection, it is love. Love for the person you are, and love for the person you are still becoming.